Hello guys and welcome back to I Read a Little, and if you're new here, hi, my name is Talia and today I'm going to be discussing the books that I read in the month of July. All of the books that I read during this month were part of Read-Eh-Thon, so I'm going to talk about the first of the two and then the second. So for the first part of the month I was participating in the Read-Eh-Thon, which was a readathon designed to publicise Canadian authors and familiarise people with Canadian work, basically, sort of give homage to Canada. So for that I read 4 books, and then during the latter half of the month I participated in the O.W.L.S Read-A-Thon, or the O.W.L.S Challenge. Now this was hosted by Book Roast and it originally took place in the month of April, however she's doing the Newts in the month of August, so she said that if you hadn't already participated you could spend July doing your O.W.L.S so that you could then progress on to your Newts. And if you didn't already know, O.W.L.S are ordinary wizarding levels as part of Harry Potter. I think you take the exam in the 5th year. So Book Roast created certain challenges that you could complete that go with all of the different subjects that you would be taking at Hogwarts. And then the subjects that you do manage to complete in your O.W.L.S you can then go on to take as your Newts, which is going to be taking part in the month of August, as I said. So first of all I'll talk about the books that I read for Read-Eh-Thon, and then I'll talk about the books that I read for my O.W.L.S. So I had a really good readathon when I participated in Read-Eh-Thon. I read 4 books, 3 of which I really enjoyed and 1 not so much. But it really opened my eyes up to lots of different Canadian authors of whom I want to read more of their stuff. So the readathon itself has actually been really rewarding for me. You may be able to hear the hoover, I apologise for that, guys. So the first book that I read was A Complicated Kindness by Miriam Toews, and this was actually the book that I did not enjoy out of the 4 books. It's basically set in Manitoba in a small village, and it follows the story of Naomi Nichols, who is a young girl living with a group of Mennonites, and I actually didn't know what Mennonites were. The book sort of starts talking about them almost as if you know about Mennonites, and I didn't actually, so I had to Google it and like find out what it was. And the sort of thing I got from the book is that she's living in some sort of like weird cult town where they follow like a really strict religion, and it's a bit weird, and it sort of follows her life and her desire to escape this regime, basically. Her mother and her sister have disappeared and she lives with her father, who is a bit incapable, and we don't know what happened to her mother and sister, and it just follows Naomi as she's trying to like rebel against the area that she lives in, basically, because they're not allowed to like watch TV and they're not allowed to dance and stuff, and it's a bit weird. I didn't like this book at all. The main character I found really annoying. I didn't like her father. I didn't in fact like any of the characters in this book. It was really mundane, nothing really happened. Maybe they did that on purpose because you're trying to sympathise with her living in this like shitty town, so maybe they wanted to make it boring for you so that you could sympathise with her, but it didn't work for me. And lots of weird stuff. I don't want to talk about it because it will be a spoiler for the book if you do want to read it, but lots of weird stuff happened towards the end of the book that left many unanswered questions, and it frustrated me, and I almost thought that the end of the book should have been the beginning. There was no resolution really to the story, and nothing much had really happened anyway during the story to resolve. It all kicked off in the last couple of pages and then the book ended, and that really fucking pissed me off. So I only gave this book 2 stars. I was really disappointed, and it's gotten actually like some mixed reviews on Goodreads, but a lot of people liked it and I think it's considered to be quite a popular book. So I don't really get why it wasn't for me, but I just did not enjoy it. And the next book that I read for the Read-Eh-Thon was Ruth Ozeki's A Tale for the Time Being. I really enjoyed this book. I think I gave it 4 stars. It's a bit odd, and it takes a bit of a weird, eerie, supernatural twist at the end where weird stuff's happening that you can't really explain, but the story itself throughout was really gripping. I really enjoyed it. So it follows the story of a girl called Now and a person called Ruth who's in some part of Canada, I can't remember exactly where, and basically a tsunami has happened in Japan, I believe, and the resulting waves of the tsunami are still being felt in Canada, and Ruth is walking along the beach one day and she finds a package that has a diary in it from a girl called Nao who was living in Japan. And the diary basically tells Nao's kind of life story, focusing on her grandmother, who is a monk at a temple, and she's basically uses the diary as a way of telling people about her nan and how amazing her nan is, and like all of the wisdom that she has bestowed upon her. It's more in depth than that. Now doesn't lead a very happy life. She's bullied at school, there are issues with her family and with her parents, and she basically uses the diary as a form of sort of catharsis to get away from all of these issues. And Ruth spends her time reading it, and it's about how the story of Now impacts on Ruth, and we flipped between the two characters in the different chapters, and it just follows their life basically and what happens to them, and Ruth's quest to find out who Now is, whether she's still alive, and what happened to her. Really good book. I super enjoyed it, apart from the ending, which was a bit odd and supernatural. But apart from that, it was so good. I love all the different perspectives. I really liked Now's writing, like her character and the way she wrote in her diary. I didn't like Ruth. Well, I liked Ruth, but not as much as I did Now. Like, I found myself not enjoying her perspective as much as I did the other, but that didn't ruin the book for me. I still really enjoyed it. So yeah, I gave this one 4 stars. Okay, the next book that I read for the Read-A-Thon, and possibly the one that I actually enjoyed most throughout, was Indian Horse by Richard W.L.S, and I bought this copy new and I absolutely love it. It's so crisp, you can see it catches the shine. Look, it's really shiny, and it's one of those like really floppy books, but it's just really crisp. I absolutely love it, and I'm glad because I absolutely loved this book. I think I gave it 5 stars. It's not a happy tale. There are trigger warnings in this book for sexual assault and physical abuse, of, you know, beating people up and torture and things like that, so be warned of that. The kids in this story get treated like shit, and some of the descriptions are quite graphic and harrowing, so I will warn you about that. It is not all, well, some parts of it are a bit happy, but it's not a happy tale really. So it follows the story of a child called Saul Indian Horse, and at the start of the book he is living with his family in the wild, trying to reconnect with the old family traditions. But meanwhile, around them, Ojibwe children are being kidnapped and sent to boarding schools that are being run by priests, and they're trying to integrate them into mainstream society and sort of shove religion down their throat, and eradicate all of their cultural or ethnic roots. So eventually Saul loses his family and he ends up having to attend one of these boarding schools. The boarding schools are absolutely horrific. Some of the scenes that are described in this book are grotesque and really cruel. And while he's at the boarding school, he decides that he will join their hockey team, and he uses hockey as a kind of respite away from the world that he's having to live in. Eventually it follows Saul's life as he becomes older, and as his relationship with hockey progresses, and he enters into a world where he's being faced with a lot of racism and being treated a lot differently from everybody else, and it's just the way he perceives this and what happens to him as a result. Really enjoyed it. I don't really like hockey. Like, I didn't like hockey before I read this book, and now I've read this book I kind of want to like get into hockey. I don't know why. It was like I felt with him like that was the only positive part of the book, so you really clung to that. You clung to like the feeling, the jovial feeling that he had while he was playing hockey, and it was really the only positive aspect of this book. So therefore, if you really empathised with his character, it really drew you towards that sport. It was really the only salvation in any moment of this book. So if you have any kind of feeling whatsoever, it did sort of push you in the direction of, oh yeah, hockey's great, because, you know, it was the only thing that made him fucking happy. So yeah, I really recommend reading this book. It's so good. It's written by an Indigenous author. That was part of the challenges for Read-A-Thon, to read an Indigenous author. Unfortunately, Richard W.L.S has died. He's passed away. But he's written a lot of other books, several memoirs that I plan on reading just because I enjoyed this book so much. Okay, and the fourth and final book that I read for Read-A-Thon was The Marrow Thieves by Sherry Dimmerline, I think she's called. I'll put the picture of the book cover up here because I don't have a physical copy. And basically this is set in a dystopian world where global warming has seen the destruction of society, basically. If you read The Road, it's kind of similar to that. So as a result of this, people have lost the ability to dream, so there is kind of like a weird eerie supernatural element as part of that. So yeah, they're basically living in a world where you have looters, you have people like selling you basically, and it's just like not a nice place to be. Unfortunately, Indigenous people are the only people remaining that have the ability to dream. Therefore, as a result of this, they are hunted down and sent to factories where their marrow is like extracted from them and given to the public as a means of them dreaming. It's all a bit odd, and we don't know what happens to the people after that. I think they die. So we are following a group of people. I think it's like 4 or 5 people. I can't quite remember the number. And we're basically following them in hiding as they're trying to survive and hide from these people that are trying to take their marrow, and also trying to like rise up against the people that are trying to do it and find safety for themselves. And it really goes into detail about all the individuals and their story prior to all of this happening. I really enjoyed the book. I think a little bit of it went over my head towards the end and I didn't really understand why any of this was happening. Like, a lot wasn't explained. The only reason I liked it so much was because of the characters. The characters were really well written and created, and I loved all of the different backstories for them and the like attachments that they had towards each other. I think that was done really well, but the story a little bit eluded me. I wasn't quite sure a lot of the time what was going on, but I still really enjoyed it. I remember being disappointed in the ending, so maybe that's what the issue was. I don't think it really had a solid ending, like it wasn't really that explained, it just kind of ended. I could be wrong there. I think I gave it 3.5 stars, so that, like, to me that's like a middle grade sort of book. Like, wasn't fantastic but it wasn't bad. I still enjoyed it quite a lot, but it just wasn't, I remember it left something wanting for me. So yeah, that was all the books that I read for the Read-A-Thon challenge. I actually completed all of the challenges. I think there were 5 or 6. And now I'm going to talk about what I read for Owls. I managed to complete 10 of my 12 owls, which I'm fucking pleased about. Like, I'm so happy because I went on a holiday in the month of July and you just don't have time for reading when you're on holiday. So I was really worried that I wasn't gonna I wanted to do all 12, so I'm quite pleased that I managed to do 10. The only ones that I didn't manage to complete was History of Magic and Divination, but to me that's not really the end of the world. I think I can live with that. So I'll start from the first subject and just work my way down and let you guys know what I managed to read for that. So for the subject Ancient Runes, the challenge was to read a book with a symbol on the cover. So for that I chose to read A Flame in the Mist by Read-Eh-Thon, I think is her name. And I chose this because it has a phoenix on the cover, so I thought that really counted because like phoenix is like a symbol of rebirth, so I was like, I'm going to count that. And it follows the story of a girl called Mariko, and basically she is, I think she's a noble person, and she's being married to the emperor's son, as a way of her family either getting money, I think, or like some sort of political relationship. I'm not really sure, I can't remember. And her wagon is attacked on the way by a group of, like, not assassins, they're like rogue people. So she decides that she's going to dress as a man and go and find out why they attacked her, because presumably they were hired by somebody. So she infiltrates their gang, dressed as a boy, and it's what happens as a result of this. Meanwhile, her family have sent someone out to try and find her, so all that shit goes down. The Emperor's like son wonders where she is, you know, all this crap. It's supposed to be a retelling of Mulan, so I've heard. I didn't see any connection with Mulan whatsoever in this book, apart from the fact that she dresses as a guy. Didn't get it. So if somebody could explain to me why it's a retelling of Mulan, like, feel free, because that just went over my head a little bit. And I didn't enjoy the book as much as I thought I would. I think I gave it 3.5 stars. A lot of stuff was unanswered. The gang that she ends up hanging around with. The forest that they live in is magical and it's not really explained how it's magical. I didn't feel as attached to the characters as I thought I would. Some of the plot felt quite rushed. There was definitely insta-love where I personally did not see any kind of fizz whatsoever, so it felt quite uncomfortable that this was being forced upon me. I hate starting a series and not finishing it, so I probably will read the second one. Hopefully it will be an improvement on the story a little bit, we will see. So the next book that I read, or the subject I read next, was Arithromancy, and that was to read a book with a number in the title. And I have a physical copy, but I don't know what I've done with it, so I'll put it up here. And that was The Seven Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton, or Tutton, I think. This book was so good. So it's basically like a murder mystery. It's like Cluedo. And I don't really like those sorts of books. I never read murder mysteries. I'm not really into like that sort of genre. But everyone was raving about this book, so I thought, no, I'll pick it up and give it a go. And it was so fucking good, and I did not see anything coming that happened in the book. There were so many like plot twists and turns that I couldn't have guessed. And I really enjoy that. I hate it when you read a book and you know what's going to happen and you're left disappointed. This did not happen with this book. It was so good. It was really well written. I really enjoyed all of the characters. I think I gave it 4 stars. And it basically follows the story of, can't remember his name and I don't want to tell you because it's a spoiler anyway, but he basically, he wakes up in a forest to the sound of someone being murdered. And he is visited by somebody who tells him that he has to solve the murder. However, the twist is he's at a party where there are a few people in attendance, maybe 20 people, I don't know. And the twist of the story is that every day he has to relive the same day but in a different person's body. So I think he has 7 bodies. Maybe that's why, hence why it's The Seven Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, and he has to find out who did the murder. The only thing I will say is it can be a bit confusing because it jumps between bodies quite a lot. So each chapter looks at a different body that he's in, however it like flips between different bodies. So a lot of the time I was confused as to like, who is he now, what's going on now, blah blah blah. But that just made it more, like just made it better, because it kept me on my toes and I didn't know what was going on until the end when it all came together. And I think that's the sign of a really well written sort of murder mystery. I think he's writing another book. I'm super excited. Hopefully it's going to be in a similar vein, because I just enjoyed it so much. So the next subject is astronomy, and that was to read a science fiction book, so that was quite easy. And I chose to read A Closed and Common Orbit by Becky Chambers, which is the second book in the Wayfarers series. The first one was A Long Way to a Small and Angry Planet. And I read that book when it first came out and was blown away by how good it was. It's a kind of book that you can read if you're not that into sci-fi, because it doesn't really follow the same vein of a classic sci-fi book. It's more of a slice of life looking at a group of people on a spaceship, and they're all of a different like race and ethnicity, and it's just how they intermingle, and they're looking at their stories and their life with each other basically, but it's in space. So it was quite easy to read. And the second book, I won't go into too much detail about it because it could be spoilery, because it happens just after the events of the first book. But needless to say, we focus more on one particular character, and the story itself is away from the original story. So the original story took place on one spaceship, whereas this second book follows one character no longer in that spaceship and doing something else on a different planet. So you're introduced to a lot of new people, and you're focusing very much on this one person and their character development and how they view their own identity. I didn't like it as much as the first book, just because I was so attached to the previous characters and I really wanted to see more of what happened to them, and it didn't grip me as much as the first one. I remember the first one I literally didn't want to put it down. I think I read it in a day, it was so good, whereas this one, at some points I felt like I was kind of forcing myself to carry on reading it. Not that I wasn't enjoying it, but it wasn't like, oh, I can't wait till I get home so I can read the rest of that book. And it was like that with the first book. That's not to say that I didn't enjoy it. I think I still gave it 4 stars, but it's not as good as the original story. So the next challenge, or the next subject, was Care of Magical Creatures, and that was to read a book with magical creatures in it. I was going to read Circe for this, or Cirque for this, by Madeline Miller. However, I had it on Libby, and unfortunately my loan expired, so I had to pick something else. So instead I picked I Am Legend by Richard Matheson, I think he's called. I had a library copy, so I'll put a picture up here, and this has vampires in it, so I think it counts. And I really hated this book. It followed the story of a guy called Robert Neville, or Neville Robert, or something like that. And basically he's like the only man left alive in his town, and all of the other people have become what he considers to be vampires. Like, obviously vampires haven't existed before, so it's a term that's like loosely used by him, or like they are vampires but they don't behave in the traditional way all the time. So the book basically follows him trying to learn about their weaknesses, how to kill them, how they came about, looking at like their DNA and like how this thing happened, how this evolution happened. And we basically like follow him slowly going mad inside of his house. He basically barricades himself inside of his house, and we just follow his like incoherent rambling throughout most of the book. And I just didn't like it. Like, the character annoyed me. He was really like needy and whiny and completely useless, and like, I don't know, it bothered me. The book bothered me. It made a nice point at the end about evolution and like the natural way of things, and like how, like, you know, humans eventually are going to be like, there's going to be something superior or whatever, I don't know, but like, it was I didn't like it. I gave it 2 stars. I don't even think it deserves that, to be honest. Okay, so Charms was to read a fantasy book, and for that I read Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. I had a library copy which I've given back, so I don't have the like physical copy. I wish I did, because it's so fucking thick and I really want to show you guys how thick it is. And this basically follows the story of, oh god, I can't remember her name. Feng something, I think she's called. So basically the world that we are looking at, loads of opium wars have happened because people are like abusing opium, so it's called the Poppy Wars, and these 3 like superhero mystery people managed to save the world from the Poppy Wars, and now like we're all in peace, whatever. But there is like a nobler society and a slum society, and there is a prestigious military academy that train people up for if there's ever another war or what have you. So a young girl from the slums manages to train and gain entrance into this academy that usually only take noble people, and she's treated like shit basically because people don't think anyone from the slums deserves a place, and I don't think anyone from the slums has ever gotten a place. And it follows her story there and the subjects that she takes on her life there and what she learns, and there's like some shamanism there as well. I don't really know how to describe it without like giving a spoiler. It's so good. It's like an epic fantasy. I think it is going to blow up and be possibly like one of the best fantasy novels of this year. It's so good, really really good, and it's going to be part of a trilogy, and I cannot wait to read the second book. It's like there's empires, there's like clans, and it's just like, oh my god, it's so good. I think I gave that 5 stars. I recommend that anyone read it, honestly. So for the subject of Defense Against the Dark Arts, I read Daughter of Smoke and Bone by Laini Taylor. And this was a weird book. Like, I don't really know how to describe it. It basically follows the story of a girl whose name I can't remember. Karu is her name, and it follows the story of Karu. Initially at the beginning of the book she is attending sort of an art school with her friends, and she does these drawings of like these mysterious characters. Not centaur, what are they? Chimera. Yeah, she does these drawings of these chimera, and her friend thinks they're really cool and everything, and then as it turns out they're actually real, and she's been raised by them through this secret door into this world that no one knows about, and they raised her, and she's not really sure about her lineage or where she came from, only that she was raised by these people. But it's about basically the world she gets embroiled in with these chimera, and how she learns about herself and her history once a kind of war erupts between chimera and angels. I really enjoyed this book. It's kind of a book that went over my head a little bit as an adult. It's the sort of thing that I probably would have enjoyed reading as a teen because it's a bit cringy in places. It's definitely written for a younger audience, I would say, and I kind of wish like I'd been younger when I read it. I still appreciate it, but I don't know whether I'd want to continue with the series, because parts of it I just found a bit, I don't know, the relationships were a bit cringy, and some of the writing was a bit cringy, like the vocals that they used and the word terminology they used was a bit like teeny boppy. I think I gave it 3.5 stars. I still enjoyed it, but like it's a bit outdated for me, I think, unfortunately, but I may continue with the series, I do not know. So for herbology, the task was to read a book with a nature-related title, so I chose In Darkling Wood by Emma Carroll, and I think this is a middle grade book. I basically just typed in like wood on Libby and just picked whatever was available. I don't normally read middle grade, and I kind of probably won't read it again, maybe, because I found this quite like hard to read as an adult. I don't know, I think some people can do it and some people just can't. The writing bothered me, I don't know, and it was about fairies, and it's not really my thing. So basically the main character, the young girl, the main character whose name I can't remember as per usual, she's living with her mother and brother, and her brother is very sick and he needs a heart transplant. One becomes available, so her mother and her brother have to go to hospital, and she is sent to live with her estranged grandmother on her father's side, so she doesn't have much to do with her father either. Her grandmother lives on an old house that is surrounded by a woodland, and the main character meets a young girl in the woodland who claims that fairies exist and that she needs to save the fairies, otherwise they will do bad things. And then it flitters between present time with the main character and sort of World War period, where she's reading letters from a young girl that she's found in the loft of their house, and the relationship that she had with the fairies during that time, and the discovery of the fairies. So yeah, it was a good book. I really enjoyed it. Definitely like clearly middle grade book. I'm not a fan of fairies. I don't know why. I didn't like it that much. The book itself was okay. I think it's just that it wasn't my sort of thing. So I'm not discouraging anyone from reading it, because you probably would still enjoy it. But the subject just wasn't really for me. I can't remember what I gave it. I think I still gave it like 3 stars or 3.5 stars, because it wasn't badly written. It just wasn't really my thing. Okay, now on to the subject of Muggle studies. That was to read a non-fiction book, I believe, and this is probably one of the best ones that I read for the whole of the read-a-thon, and that is The Salt Path by Raynor Wynn. I don't have the book because I've lent it to somebody and I always take the dust jacket off, so at least I've got the dust jacket. And I actually bought this while I was on holiday in Cornwall, because it's written by a local author, and it's a signed copy, and I wanted to sort of give back to the community, so I thought I'd buy that. And it basically follows the story of Raynor and her husband Moth. So they're living in their family home, which I think is on a farm, and they rent out parts of the property to holiday makers. So that's also, they live there, and that's also how they make their living. And a friend of theirs who they invested money into goes bankrupt and claims that they owe them a lot of money. As it turns out, they don't actually owe them the money. However, the evidence that they find is too late for the court case, and they are found guilty, or like they're not cleared of the court case, and they're told that they do need to repay back the money to the man. As a result, they lose their home and thus their livelihood, because they use their home as their form of employment. So they are then made homeless. And then unfortunately, I think in the same week, her husband Moth finds out that he has a terminal brain disease. So the start of the book, I must warn you, is very like sad, and the whole book really has elements of real sadness in it. It's very much a self-searching, finding your way kind of story, and looking at life. I don't know how to describe it. It's a very philosophical book, and there are a lot of moments of sort of self-reflection and encouraging you to think about your life / the way you've lived it. So they basically, after Moth's diagnosis, they decide that they will buy a tent off of eBay for about 36 quid, I think, or something like that, and that they're going to walk the southwest coast path. So that's a 630 30-mile walk, and it starts in, I wish I had the books as a map in it, it starts in Minehead, and you come all the way down here to Land's End, and then you go all the way up here and it finishes in Poole. So yeah, they have no money, they have really very little equipment. Moth is basically dying, and I think the only income they have is a £43 some sort of benefit that's given to them to buy food, and they decide they're just going to go and walk the coast path. It is such a good book. So they go from Somerset to Dorset and via Devon and Cornwall. I get the impression that they do have some walking experience, because she mentions throughout the book various walking books that she's read, but I don't think it's on the kind of scale that they do this time around. Like, probably sort of like what I do, where I go and walk sections of the coast path, not the whole fucking thing. So it's quite a feat what they have done. And the book is hilarious. So it has elements of real sadness and sombre reflecting on life. However, it is intermingled with really funny tales of their experiences walking along the coast path, and the sort of odd people they met and the very strange conversations they had. Some of the stuff that they run into on their walk is just hilarious. But yeah, I absolutely loved this book. It's probably one of the best books I've read so far this year. And I hope she writes some more stuff, fingers crossed. But yeah, I think 5 stars I gave this. So for potions, the task was to read a book with alchemy in. I found it really hard to find a book that contained alchemy. I'm pretty sure they are out there, but when you try and think of one, you're like, fuck, I don't know any books that contain alchemy. So I ended up picking Brandon Sanderson's Final Empire, which is book 1 in the Mistborn trilogy. I've never read Brandon Sanderson before, and it's really thick. I don't know why I chose it. I probably could have finished the other 2 subjects if I hadn't picked such a thick book, but I'm so glad I picked this book up. I am a convert. I love Brandon Sanderson. I want to read all of his stuff. Oh my god, it's so good. It is an epic tale. It kind of reminds me of Shogun by James Clavell, in that sort of like grand feat of just amazing writing that just portrays such an epic tale. So basically we are presented in a world that's kind of dystopian, not really. So the world is surrounded by ash and mist, and there is a Lord Ruler who reigns over the whole world because he did some sort of amazing feat to save humankind, and as a result he is seen as some sort of god. Unfortunately, as a result of this, he enslaved a group of population, or a race called the Scar, and they are sent to work on plantations. They're used as slaves by the nobler part of society. So there are a certain number of noble houses who abuse the Scar and treat them as slaves, basically, and treat them like shit. And there is also an element of magic. So there are people called Mistlings and Mistborn, and they have the ability to swallow metal and burn it to harness particular kinds of powers. So certain metal, once burned, grants them particular powers. And a lot of the Mistborn work for the noble houses as a way of protecting them. And we follow a group of rebels who basically want to overthrow the Lord Ruler and eradicate slavery of the Scar. And we follow one girl who ends up joining the rebel group, and basically what happens to all of them as they try and overthrow this Lord Ruler. It's so good. It has the perfect mix of sort of like political empires being overthrown and magic and character building, and yeah, I really enjoyed this book. It's like 646 pages long, and I think the next book is like 900, but I cannot wait to read it. I gave it 5 stars, no regrets, absolutely love it. I want to read everything he's ever written. And finally, the last subject was Transfiguration, and that was to read, hang on, either a book with a cat on the cover or a book that contains something transforming into something else. So I chose the cat on the cover, and I read The Silent Companions by Lisa Purcell, I think it's called, and I loved this book. I've read so many books through this challenge that I wouldn't normally read, and this is basically a ghost story, or a horror, not a horror story, it's a ghost story, and I absolutely loved this book. I found it so scary. There were certain parts where I had to sleep with my bedroom light on because I found it so creepy, and I don't know why. My mum read it and she didn't feel it was as scary as I found it. I think it's just because it's got children in it, and I just don't like kids in a creepy, like when they're behaving in a creepy way. Like, I don't know, anything with children in. Every time I've watched like a Doctor Who episode where it's got creepy children in, I'm just like, no, turn it off, get it off my screen. So yeah, maybe it was that, I don't know. But it basically follows the story of a woman whose name I also can't remember. She's recently married this bloke and she's pregnant, and he goes back to his family estate to get it ready for them to live in, and while he's there he dies mysteriously. So she and her ward, who is his niece, I think, have to go back to the building and bury him and then like restore the building and live in it, basically. And it's about the creepy shit that happens when they're in this building, essentially. And it flits between the story of her and her ward and the things they discover, and it goes back in time to his ancestors, I think, who lived there, and what happened to them while they were there, that has possibly impacted on the strange things that are happening in present time. And they basically find these wooden figures called Silent Companions in the cellar, who look amazingly lifelike. They're just wooden painted figures, but they look really lifelike, and something happens with them basically that I don't really want to get into, but like they have a store. They were purchased by the family from the olden times that we are also looking at the perspective of, so it sort of shows the connection as to how these figures appeared and who bought them and what happens to them, and then it follows present time and what happens to them. It's so weird. I can't really get into the plot without like revealing a lot of spoilers, but it's so scary, it's so creepy, and the ending had such a weird twist. Not a twist, but like it was just so amazing. I remember finishing it and being like, what the fuck? You have to read this book. I think I gave it 4 stars. It was so good. I really want to read some more of her stuff. My mum said that she's releasing a book called The Corset or something like that, and hopefully that's going to be kind of a ghosty horror story, I don't know. But I cannot wait to read it because this was really, really good. So yeah, that's the 10 of the 12 subjects that I managed to complete for my O.W.L.S, guys. So that's also all the books that I read in the month of July, so I hope you enjoyed that. Leave a comment down below if you've read any of those books and what you thought of them. I will shortly be uploading my newts, because it's already the 7th of August, so I really need to get it uploaded so you guys know what I'm like planning to read and what subjects I'm planning to take. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed that video, and I will catch you in my next one.